Hey, everybody, Patrick Connor here, and welcome to the Knuckles and Gloves podcast. We are doing a Terence Crawford versus Shawn Porter preview today. I mean, that's going to be the main focus, but I'm here today with my boy Aris Pina, who's, of course, a CompuBox operator and a fellow fight history, but just overall fight lover like myself. Aris, what's up, man?
Hey, what's going on? Big fight this weekend. Very excited to talk about it. So,
I feel like I'm pretty excited to talk about it. Like, I think a lot of the people who listen to the show, especially a lot of the people who listen regularly, probably come from some social media platform and probably come from Twitter, or if they know us at all, and not just from listening, they probably know us like from Twitter because that's where a lot of the boxing people seem to hang out. But the other day, I only say that because the other day I tweeted out that not even including the fights this past weekend, David Benavidez, and I didn't even include the fights from this past weekend. Well, actually, I don't even know that they qualified. Point is, from that point until the end of the year, I said that there were about 10 fights where in different divisions there would be fights featured on TV where there were two top 10 fighters in a given division fighting each other. Right. And so somebody for some reason responded and said that they thought that Terence Crawford versus Shawn Porter was a one-sided fight. And I mean, I only say that and respond to that just to say that I really disagree. And I say that as a Terence Crawford kind of like fan. I like him, especially as a fighter. And I think that this is a fight where it's really going to say something about Terence Crawford in particular. But I mean, dude, Shawn Porter shows up.
Shawn Porter's a truth machine, man. If anything, he's gonna have to bring the best out of you because he makes you do a gut check. Um, Shawn Porter is probably has the best resume, top to bottom, in the welterweight division. I would say no, because I mean, in terms of just who he's fought, because he's basically fought them all now, especially with fighting Crawford. And Crawford, for his matter, is first getting his first high-profile fight against a PBC fighter. It's not against Errol Spence, which everybody has been, begging for and praying for and hoping for, and now just kind of giving up on, and what's become boxing's never-ending story. But this is a very solid substitute. It's not another fight that Crawford is kind of stuck in the top rank bubble, so to speak, like he has been for a lot of his other fights where he's been featured on ESPN and such against fights that, even though they're good, they're just fights that there's no drama to it because, Crawford's just going to come ahead. And even though he's the favorite in this fight, you just know that Porter is such a tenacious, strong, determined, just absolute animal in the ring, man. Just really difficult to fight and look good against because of how tough he is and his style and his swarming ways and how strong and so many other attributes to him that Crawford is going to be really tested here. If he can come out of this and shine and dominate Porter the way Porter hasn't been dominated before, because like I said, Porter's lost before, but he's never been fully just dominated. He's been competitive in all of his losses, really competitive, in fact, made everyone like pull out their absolute best. And gave those guys gut checks, you know what I mean, where they were in a firefight, and they'll always remember that fight as being one of their toughest. And if Crawford is able to weather that storm, not only come on top of that and then stop Shawn Porter, that would be huge, absolutely huge. I'm not sure if he's going to be able to do that because of how tough Porter is, but if Crawford is, would be able to put him away in dominant fashion, or at least just come out with a commanding decision, that's still going to be really impressive.
And that man, it would be tough for me to word it any better. I think that you nailed a lot of really important things there. That there's absolutely no question that Terence Crawford's one of the best fighters in the world. How exactly you rank him is probably going to be largely up to like preference. Like, do you like him or do you not like him, or do you prefer this person over this person? Whatever, it's going to largely come down to that. Point is that I think almost everybody agrees that he's going to be in the top like 2 or 3 pound for pound slots. And so the problem is with this, you mentioned this top rank bubble. So with welterweight being so deep, it's unfortunately been one of those divisions where the fighters who have been factioned off or were, it kind of became clear and really annoying that it was happening. And it was, there weren't a whole lot of divisions where like the best fight to be made in that particular division just can't happen. And so it became a bit of a shining example, or a not shining example, a shitty example of that division between like, Top Rank's lack of desire to work with premier boxing champions or vice versa, whatever the case might be. So for people who are going, well, then what's important about this fight, or what happened, or whatever, pretty much the story is that, like I said, there was these factions that are unwilling to work with each other. So premier boxing champions has had the vast majority of these contending welterweights over the last handful of years. A number of them have fought each other. And it's been like, well, why isn't Terence Crawford in that mix? Because he hasn't really been able to. So finally, I think that what has basically happened is that because Terence Crawford, I don't know if it's that he's uncooperative or something like that, where Top Rank sees him as uncooperative. I don't know if it's that he feels he's worth more. And, I don't know if he's driving a hard bargain. I don't know if Top Rank is disappointed that they thought he'd sell more in places outside of Omaha. I don't know what the truth is behind it, but clearly Bob Arum and Top Rank kind of took disinterest in pushing Terence Crawford hard and getting behind Terence Crawford in a promotional manner. What's
Bob
that?
was not. I said Bob certainly wasn't holding back in interviews about how he felt with Crawford either.
Well, and I think that for like a couple years, he was being kind of like, he was wording it kind of cleverly, like he was like, well, we're kind of having some difficulty promoting kind of thing, rather than outright saying it. And then the last year and a half or so, he's been outright saying, he doesn't sell ticket, shit like that. And it's like, fuck, bro. I mean, I understand that there might be some frustration there, but that's not really the hallmark of a promoter who's standing behind their fighter, or, really rooting for their fighter. And so it seemed to a lot of people like they were happy to kind of get rid of him or push him out because his contract was coming to an end. And that's really what it seemed like. And so the inability, or the, like I said, lack of desire to push him in with Errol Spence also kind of drove Terence Crawford away. So in a way, it's almost like that Shawn Porter is a consolation, and I don't want to talk the fight down again at all. But Shawn Porter is a consolation almost like in more ways than one, which is kind of lame to think of it in that regard, because Shawn Porter's a top welterweight who's going to come to fight.
Well, absolutely. I mean, like you just mentioned, Crawford has been begging for a major fight for a while, and whether we're boxing in this type of day and age too, where we're at this time where it's, even though big fights do get made, at the same time it's still as divided as it ever has been in terms of networks and who wants to work with who and how things come along and all that. And unless a fight is massively big, that all sides will try to work together because there's too much money involved, kind of like what happened with Fury and Wilder, and potentially what could have happened with Spence and Crawford if all sides want to play along. But like, it's very rare when something like that happens. So for the most part, guys will just be barking on Twitter at each other, hey, I'll fight you. So yeah, I want to be the best. But for the most part, though, there's enough competition on their network, in their promotion stable, whatever you want to call it, that they don't really have to venture to the other side. And then those fights that, they get marinated, as it's been said before. So it's one of those things now that, like, Crawford, he's been, like you mentioned, he's been looked upon as like one of the top 3 best fighters in the world, but he's still looking for that major signature win. Even though he's 37, 38, at this point now, he has big wins on him and he's been impressive in all those wins, but what's his been the signature one that he's been like craving for? For years, he was begging for the Pacquiao fight, with Aaron promising them that, yeah, we're going to get the Pacquiao fight going. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. X, Y, and Z. Always something coming up happening because of it, without it happening. And then finally, when it looked like it might come to fruition, overseas, where they said they were going to hold it.
man, I don't even
Somewhere in, was it
remember.
the Middle East or Dubai or
I might have,
somewhere, or
yeah, because
somewhere,
I think they were pushing for Dubai or something.
something. But then people didn't come up with the money, and then the pandemic happened, and then everything fell apart, they said. So Crawford instead was stuck to fight Kell Brook in the bubble as well, and instead of getting a Pacquiao fight that he craved. And I'm sure he didn't feel too great. I'm sure he was very salty when Errol Spence ended up getting the Pacquiao fight before that fell through, the one that he's been craving that whole time. And so two guys that he's been trying to, he's been trying to fight for a long time. Instead, they're going to fight each other, and he's still kind of left out in the cold. But that being said, this is his chance now. If he can win this fight, I mean, he is favored to win it, but if he can dominate Shawn Porter the way that any other person that's been able to beat him so far hasn't been able to, like Keith Thurman, Errol Spence, Kell Brook. So, if he's able to go in there and, able to do that, it's going to be huge. I mean, he certainly has the style and able to, Crawford is one of those guys that adapts better than anyone else in the game. Especially after a couple of rounds, once he figures things out and starts going through it, it's almost hard to beat him because he already puts you in checkmate. At that point, it's like he just stops that torture session because he's a sadistic dude. For a person who's not like going out there as like a one-punch knockout artist or anything like that, he just breaks you down, and you can tell he enjoys doing it each round, piece by piece, beating you up, and he never fully takes you out until he knows he has you fully beaten up, down, all around, just mentally, physically, everything about it. Then he'll put you out of his misery. So I'm not sure if he's going to be able to do that with a guy like Porter, because not only is Porter such a strong physical fighter who's just in your face for 12 rounds with an incredible gas tank and just physically strong and whatever, Porter also has a really, really strong mental game that it's really hard to break a guy like that. He's been through years before. He's been to the big stage before, probably more times than Crawford already. And he knows what he's getting into with this fight, and he's very motivated for that. Instead of being another guy who doesn't really have, who's kind of stood in their bubble, has a big name, barks a lot, but finally gets into his first major fight, but never really has that significant fight before that because he's never really been begging for it. Porter is that dude out of the PBC realm who's tried to fight everybody, doesn't give a damn. He'll fight you anytime, any place, and wants the best competition. He wants all the smoke, and he's the one guy that was like, oh, let me go at Crawford. I'm not just going to bark about it. I want to be about it. Let's make this fight. And he was the one dude that it didn't make this much issue. It wasn't a lot of, once he became the mandatory challenger, he was like, let's do it. Let's make it. And it wasn't that difficult to make. So yeah, here we are today. I'm really excited for him, man. It's going to be one of those styles. The styles are going to mesh well for me. I think the styles are going to mesh really well. It's going to make for a really good action fight.
You, in talking about Terence Crawford, so I mean, I feel like I bring this up pretty much every time a Terence Crawford fight comes up or we preview it or whatever. I mean, I guess just for some perspective as far as why I pick the way that I pick or why I talk about him the way I talk about him or whatever. But I mean, I remember it was the Brady's Prescott fight. The Brady's Prescott fight, which was the undercard of Alvarado Rios 2, I'm pretty sure, in 2013. He was a
substitute, wasn't he?
Yeah, it was like a kind of last minute kind of thing, like, or, not super last minute, but like a few weeks or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but point is, I remember hearing about him, but to me, he was just like kind of like an up and coming fighter. And I remember thinking, oh, well, like he looks really good. And he kind of played keep away in the fight, but he outboxed Brady's Prescott. But like, I thought that he outboxed him pretty comfortably. He didn't really put himself in harm's way. And I remember Kevin Ioli and a handful of other writers ringside like had Brady's Prescott winning or like had it a draw. And I was like, whoa.
Prescott probably even went around in that fight, if I remember.
Dude, it was like, I just remember watching it and being like, he just never even got going. Like it was not, and that's like really Brady's Prescott-ish. Like he'd show up one fight and then another fight, he just like barely show up. And he didn't show up, but also Terence Crawford like just didn't let him show up. He just played keep away. He wasn't having
broke him down.
Absolutely. Yeah, shut him down. Wasn't having it. But I would remember cracking up about that. But I do remember thinking, wow, okay, he's clearly skilled. clearly a good fighter, young fighter at that point. So now he's 34. At that point, I want to say he must have been, I don't know, 25, something like that. In any case, he's come quite a long way since then. As a fighter, I think that he is one of the more complete fighters out there today. Clearly, um, I don't really have much use for the whole turning southpaw and orthodox thing personally. I usually think that that's like a bad idea overall, but he is one of the few fighters who seems to do it very well and seems to actually make it useful, rather than like a novelty. And he has seemed to develop. I don't know if it's because of the promotional shit. I don't know if it's just that he has it because it's just good, like the dog in him, as they say, but he clearly has like a mean streak. If you piss him off in the ring, or if you do something that he doesn't like, or if you start trying to get off on him, it's like, he punishes you. You're in trouble. And it's the same type of shit Floyd Mayweather used to do. And I know they're not the same fighter, and I'm not saying they are, but Floyd Mayweather used to do the exact same type of shit where, like, if you started trying to foul him, just like Victor Ortiz, crazily enough, right before that fight, I wrote a preview for that fight. And I literally said, Victor Ortiz does a lot of stupid shit. And if he tries stupid shit with Floyd Mayweather, like, he's going to get hurt real bad. And that's literally what happened. And I remember cracking up so hard, like, wow, I'm kind of surprised I called that, I guess, but pretty predictable considering Ortiz's bullshit. But Terence Crawford has that same mentality where if you try to foul him, you try to fuck with him, he's gonna punish you. He's gonna whoop your fucking ass. And but like you said, this style matchup, it's a really good style clash. That kind of like a slightly more classic or more orthodox boxer puncher versus the guy who's swarming, kind of power punching. Throughout his career, Shawn Porter's been compared to Shane Mosley because he kind of looks like him physically, also has his father, in his corner, and kind of had a similar style in the sense that he was very physical and very aggressive, kind of boxer puncher. His style has changed to be a little bit more forward and hard charging in recent years. But it's the kind of thing where he's going to make it a difficult night for anybody he fights. There's only going to be a select few fighters who have an easy night against Shawn Porter. And so, like you said, if Terence Crawford is the kind of fighter, I guess, or is good enough that he makes this easy, that he makes it one-sided, dominant, something like that, that would be an incredibly big statement. No question.
Porter, I mean, he's just, from the first of the bell, I'm just going to envision that he's just going to come out there and start swarming Crawford, because Crawford's that type of guy that, we've discussed this before. He takes a couple of rounds sometimes to warm up. Not so much that he's out there ice cold or anything, but Crawford can be touched. And usually in the first few rounds, he's the type of guy that has to like digest what's in front of him. And, he takes a couple of rounds to basically just feel his way out, and he might even drop a round or two because of that. It happens. But then once he starts again to dial in and, figures things out and goes from there, because he's a very smart guy and he's constantly thinking in his mind. And once you already start seeing him turning southpaw and doing things like that, like you mentioned a minute ago, you already tell that like he's settling down now and starting to work with things that he's seeing and starting to, pick it up from there. Like I said, it's mental chess with him. He's always trying to think ahead. He's always working ahead. But Porter is just going to be staying on top of him. And that's what's going to be fascinating, is that if Crawford is going to, it's going to be tough for him to have the normal fight where he's going to be staying in the center of the ring trying to dictate from over there, because Porter is going to constantly trying to keep him on the ropes. And Porter is such a strong guy that he's able to bully people, even like Errol Spence at times, who's very strong in himself. So it's going to be interesting who Crawford, who's no slouch in the strength department, he's pretty underrated in that regard, is going to be able to handle that, because this is the first time he's fighting a dude who's a full-on pit bull that will be constantly trying to maul him, because if maul him, make him uncomfortable and just keep him on the ropes.
Yeah, it's going to be an uncomfortable night for just about anybody that Shawn Porter faces. And I had to go look because I'm not somebody who follows amateur boxing like that. Every so often I'll know some facts or some factoids or something like that about amateur boxing, but it's been difficult to follow in recent years because they don't make it easy to follow. But in looking at their amateur careers, they have somewhat similar amateur careers, highly decorated amateurs, both on the national level and probably and saw some fairly elite international competition too. I mean, they really match up well on paper. So this is a fight that I don't know why anybody would call it one-sided or something they wouldn't want to see or something like that. Obviously, it's not the fight that we want to see, but going into that, it's a really good gauge of what that fight should be. But just kind of out of curiosity, I wanted to look to what like the odds would be. And one of the more famous websites has currently Terence Crawford is a -600 favorite, Shawn Porter a +425 underdog. Meaning, I mean, that's a very firm favorite. So, I mean, I'm actually a little bit surprised that he's that big up, but the over under, I guess, is 10 and a half rounds. So I don't know. I think that anybody, like I said, having an easy time with Shawn Porter, and anybody like if Terence Crawford managed to stop Shawn Porter, whether it's under 10 and a half rounds or over, that's quite the feat. And that would be the kind of thing where it would basically say, we need to see Crawford Spence. Like let's stop fucking around and let's do it.
I mean, enough is enough in the first place already, man. Like it's been long enough. It's been so many years, so many back and forths. People are just getting over it too, to the point where it's not quite the level of Mayweather Pacquiao. I don't think anything's going to reach that level of ridiculousness, but
I swear I was just thinking like almost the exact same thing in my head. Like, it's not to Mayweather Pacquiao levels, but it is the similar situation.
I mean, it's growing, you know what I mean? Like Mayweather
Yeah,
Pacquiao is like
annoying.
Mount Everest in terms of bullshit, and then this one is like quite teetering. It's
yeah, this is like Kilimanjaro to not quite Everest, almost there.
Like the episode of The Simpsons when Homer was climbing the mountain, he thought he reached to the top, and they looked up and saw the even bigger one, and was just like, "Oh yeah, that's Mayweather Pacquiao." All right, nothing will ever be that ridiculous again. But I mean, this one is still absurd. How many years have we been going back and forth now about this, about who's gonna fight who? Ever since Crawford moved up, basically, no? And
pretty
when
much,
he moved up, and when was that? 2017 when he beat Jeff Horn, 2018, around that time. So
yeah, so he was off almost a year and beat Jeff Horn in 2018. So it's been a good 3 years that at least the idea could be feasible because he's at welterweight. But I mean, it's been pretty clear that that was the fight that he should be moving up for. Like that's what everybody wanted. And that was pretty clear from the get-go.
And since Crawford is one of those guys now, too, that he's an elite fighter, so that means he's only going to fight 2 times a year, like most guys. And those 2 times a year, you would hope that would be against other elite competition, and it really hasn't been. I mean, Kell Brook and Amir Khan obviously were great fighters in their time and well-to-do, but they were both already past it by the time they got in the ring with Crawford. And neither one of them had anything to offer, any type of resistance to offer that Crawford was going to get any type of real acclamation out of those fights. Like he beat them, but everyone already kind of knew in the first place, oh, they already spent bullets. They should be fighting each other. Why are they getting shots at the best in the world? And then Green Machine, who gave Crawford a very good fight for that matter, is a very good fighter in himself, but still again, why, that should have been like just the in-between fight after like a super fight that he had, not just like a fight that he was going to have after beating Amir Khan and then going from that to Kell Brook type deal. You know what I mean? He's stuck.
Yeah.
Like he's just almost like in a rut, and people are saying he's wasting his prime. I don't even know if he's past his prime now. Like he's sitting on the vine because a guy that's talented who should be in super fights and should be out there. And if he's considered one of the 3 best fighters in the world, then why can't he get the fights when the money should be there too? Like people have this interest. People are demanding these fights.
Well, and it is kind of like a what's good for the goose is good for the gander situation when talking about Spence and Crawford too, because there has been a lot of criticism toward Spence. I mean, guilty. You know what I'm saying? Like I've criticized
Absolutely.
him, and in my opinion, I believe rightly so too. But you do have to also be critical of Terence Crawford. Like for instance, I've been critical of Errol Spence. I know this is not an Errol Spence episode, but it's going to come up anytime you talk about Terence Crawford. Period. I've been critical of him because obviously it seemed like for a while he was having a very difficult time getting his act together. Just about any time we saw him in public, not training or not fighting, he was drunk. I mean, it happened only like a handful, maybe a little bit more than a handful of times, but they were memorable and they were at pretty key times PR wise. So
He was born in
it didn't look.
1990.
What's that?
He said he was born in
Yeah,
1990. In
yeah,
2015, he was
man.
15 or something.
Yeah, acting a fool on social media and having to go
Hanging out
back and
with Broner.
yeah, going back and deleting tweets the next day because it's foolish shit, and like deleting or tweeting slurry. When you're tweeting slurred, like you can't even get words right in your tweeting. You need to step back. And
Oh, I
so
always
anyway,
make sure, man, I put my phone away and just or like X out of Twitter
100.
or something whenever I'm
I
feeling funky. I don't even look at my phone because I want to
100%,
make sure I don't do nothing stupid. Not that I would.
100%.
I'm pretty good on
I
that.
used to get all lit and be like, "Woo, let's cruise Twitter." And then I now, if it's if it's beyond a slight buzz, the social media goes off. It can't. It's not a good idea ever. But the problem is that he's a professional athlete and he's a world class welterweight. And then on top of just these public appearances, then of course he gets into a really bad accident where he gets pretty badly injured. This is a bad look. And like I said, but turnabout being fair play, Terence Crawford at welterweight for the past 3 years, looking at he's had 5 fights in 3 years. That's fairly inactive. And they've been Jeff Horn, who granted was undefeated at the time, but I think that we've now understand that he is just not on that level. Jose Benavidez Jr., who again, very good fighter, undefeated at the time, but also just not on Terence Crawford's level. All due respect to him. Amir Khan, good fighter, goofball, fucking crazy ass, who who seems to be one of those fighters where he'll have success and then just get knocked out. Green Machine, good fighter. I mean, these another undefeated fighter, but this is not like a super strong resume. And Kell Brook has been kind of a bit of a spent bullet, or at least was thought of as a spent bullet for a
He's
while, and
had
then
both
that
of
was
his eyes broken, man. Yeah,
it's now been, and it was pretty much confirmed against Terence Crawford that it was that he probably shouldn't have been in there. And anyway, so this is not a good welterweight run, and there does exist the possibility there that perhaps Terence Crawford has gotten more complacent than we realize. Perhaps he's kind of taken for granted that he's had the success that he's had at welterweight, and the competition hasn't been very good. Whereas Shawn Porter's really had a fucking gauntlet. He's run the gauntlet, trial by
this is
fire.
gonna be a year, bro, since Crawford's fought.
Totally, yeah. A year yesterday, whereas, and it's not as if Shawn Porter's been extremely busy himself, but in comparing their welterweight run is like there's no comparison.
Oh, absolutely not, man. Porter is one of those guys that, like we mentioned, he's fought a who's who in the division already. In terms of like the PBC guys, he fought Ugas, who no one else has really tried to who come off the Pacquiao one. No one else is trying to get into the ring with. He fought Broner when Broner still had something to him. He Thurman. He fought Spence, Danny Garcia. So like he fights a who's who. You know what I mean? Even after all those guys, like there's other guys Porter's have fought in between that. Like he always fights tough competition. He always seeks out the best and he always seeks the tough, and he constantly fights at the top level guys. And like I said, him never being blown out at that top level when these are elite fighters is really impressive. And whether or not he gets the W, he's always in very, very entertaining fights regardless, and good ones. So yeah, man, this is gonna be a tough one for Crawford, considering, like you mentioned, Porter has not been like super active himself. He's coming off of like a year layoff that's actually been a little bit longer than Crawford's is gonna be. So both guys are fighting off rust in that regard. But again, you just know that this is a fight that Crawford's gonna be motivated for, because this is like the biggest one of his career in terms of publicity and everything else that's going for it. And this is Porter's chance, as he's been saying before, man. This is his last chance. This is his last one to get like a big, big bite of the ring and to get like the big win that he's been craving his entire career. So both guys are coming in motivated.
And he's had a tough run, you know what I mean? And also I think style wise, his style is probably going to be a little bit more dependable and maybe less dependent on reflexes and and affected by rust. Like, what he's going to do. He's going to come in and press, and he's going to be aggressive regardless of whether he's been out a year or whatever. Not that that's not going to affect him, but I think that just his style is going to be a little bit more predictable. But look, dude, he's had a hard run. He's had a tough welterweight career. He's faced most of the top welterweights of the last 8 to 10 years, and they're, again, just kind of hedging on that. There is also the possibility that he's taken a little bit more damage and has been roughed up a little bit more than we realized, and that winds up being really highlighted against somebody like Terence Crawford, who does pick opponents apart and does find their weaknesses. So, but these are all the intriguing things about this fight, in my opinion, that there are possibilities that
Lots of intangibles.
Yes, there are a lot of X factors there, dude. A lot of, what if Terence Crawford gets a little overwhelmed by, he likes to set at the pace and kind of settle down, doesn't want to fight at a torrid pace and have to hammer out his opponent and shit like that. Generally speaking, he wants to like be
He likes to
comfortable.
fight. He likes to control the fight and have the fight go at the pace he wants, and know
Right.
that he can do what he wants and when he wants it. Like, he likes everything in control, and usually he's
Right.
so talented enough to shut his opponent down that he's able to do that. Within 3-4 rounds, he adjusts to whatever his opponent's doing, figures them out pretty much from there, and then makes his opponent, and then dictates it so that where his opponent has to go to his pace, then yeah, I think everything goes from there. Because as you see each time, as he gets more and more control with the fight, things more and more as they round, until, like we said, he gets bored with it and time to finish him off.
Totally. Yeah. And Shawn Porter might not let him settle into that pace, but that's the push and pull between those styles, the aggression and trying to overwhelm like the guy that's aggressive trying to overwhelm the boxer puncher, and the boxer puncher trying to prevent that from happening. So that's what's interesting about this fight. I'm personally really looking forward to it. Like, what do you think is going to wind up happening in this fight? Do you think that Terence Crawford's going to prove that that the Spence fight needs to happen, or do you think that Shawn Porter's going to shock him?
I'm probably going with the majority on this one. I think that Crawford has enough tools in his bank that he'll be able to pull it out. It's gonna be tough. It's gonna be a really tough fight, and I'm excited for it because I think Crawford's gonna be pushed to the limit in this one. That's what I've been waiting to see for years. Even though there's been little bits here and there where he's been tagged, he's had a little bit of difficulty, but it never really lasts more than like a round or two before he's already back in control. So this is gonna be a fight where he's fighting an elite guy finally, who's absolutely motivated as hell for this fight, who's going to push him. And we're going to see now, I guess, Crawford has even said before, to a degree, that we really haven't seen his best yet, that he hasn't had to like unleash all of his tools on someone. And hopefully Porter's going to be able to be the guy to do that. So I'm not going to predict a stoppage, because I don't know anyone that can stop Porter. Porter's such a strong guy, strong-willed guy. He can be hurt. He did. Look at the way he came back against Spence, for example, when he got dropped, right? Came in, was pissed off at himself, got up, waved at him to come right back in, started landing, actually got the better of Spence a little bit at the end of that round. Like, that's the type of dude Porter is. So
Totally.
that being said, as talented as Crawford is, I can't see him stopping him, but I can see him winning a commanding decision like 116, 112.
I think that's a pretty good call. I think that the criticism for Terence Crawford, or the criticism against Terence Crawford or whatever, even though it's at least in part, perhaps not totally his fault. Ultimately, he chose his promoter, and I guess he could have been more vocal about wanting X fight or Y fight or whatever. But also, we know how that works. We know that promoters wind up being able to punish their fighters by keeping them inactive, shelving them, giving them fights that make them look bad, etc. So we know how that goes. But the fact that Shawn Porter, I mean, there's a very strong argument, if not a very clear argument, that Shawn Porter is the best fighter that Terence Crawford has faced. And the fact that he's not even the best welterweight is, I think that's kind of a lot of the mystery here with Terence Crawford. How is Terence Crawford going to respond to somebody who is not the best welterweight, but has a difficult style? And then what is that going to mean for Terence Crawford? And so there's like this other kind of, there's this other realm on this fight, you know, this other kind of layer of, is this going to be not a justification, but is this going to solidify the idea that Terence Crawford was elite the whole time? Or is Shawn Porter going to call that into question? Is he going to challenge Terence Crawford enough that a lot of the people who were Terence Crawford detractors or Errol Spence supporters or whatever, you know, cross section that is, will they be justified in saying, nah, Terence Crawford was never that good in the first place? And look, now we saw Shawn Porter give him a whole bunch of shit and almost win, whatever the case may be. So there's kind of a lot riding on this, especially for Terence Crawford. For Shawn Porter, for sure. But I don't think there's any question. You know, Shawn Porter loses this fight. Okay, so what? He loses to Terence Crawford. We know that he's going to be in a fun fight in the future. You know, put him on TV. It's all good. And if not, that's okay too. He's doing a great job commentating on Showtime. You know, he's just one of the snazziest fucking dressers I've ever seen in my life, you know, apart from you, of course. And I mean, dude, I mean, the guy's he's pretty likable. I think he's pretty funny, and he's got in my opinion, a great career of like being an analyst or something.
Oh
like
yeah,
that
man.
ahead of
Porter has a fine career ahead of him. He's doing awesome.
He's seems like a cool guy too.
Absolutely.
So for me, like a loss here, that doesn't do much for him. A loss for Terence Crawford is a massive derailment for his career, because it's all been pointing toward a showdown with Errol Spence, or whoever it is that beats Errol Spence or whatever. It's all been pointed in that direction. So I don't know what's going on with Errol Spence health wise. I don't know if his eye is healthy enough, and I don't know exactly what's happening. But assuming he's healthy enough and can go forward with his career, that's where he's been pointed. So if Terence Crawford is derailed either by a loss or getting beaten up in a win, you know, it's going to be a tougher sell. And on top of being a tougher sell, it's going to be tough for him to argue that he deserves 50-50 or, you know, the lion's share for a Spence fight.
Absolutely, you nailed it, man. He's still not one, like, even though he's recognized as one of the top fighters pound for pound in the world, he's not one of the biggest stars in the sport. Because, like, you know, like we look at his resume, how often he's been fighting, and also for a variety of other reasons too. You know, the way the promotions over the year, he's not as popular as, say, like a Canelo, not as personable outside the ring either, I guess. So you add in all those factors, and Crawford kind of needs like these big victories, because he's not as big of an, you know, he's a popular name and people know him, especially within the world, but like casual fans or just people on outside general are not going to be as familiar with him as they would be for like someone else, like a big name in the sport. So he needs these big victories. If he doesn't, that does plummet him really badly in terms for a variety of things, not only with his career, because people now are not going to be going out their way to try to fight him. Well, if he just lost to Porter, you know, now we don't necessarily need to fight him, then yeah, it's going to be tough for him to come back from something like that, as opposed to a person like Porter, who has been in this role before, is not expected to win, so to speak, but is expected to give him a really tough time. So if he loses this fight, well, that has happened to him before. This is his position, so to speak. He gives the best fighters out there absolute gut checks, but usually just falls short. It happens. So
totally. Yeah,
Um,
and I like the fight a lot, and I think that I'm gonna agree with your pick, dude. I think that Terence Crawford should probably take it, most likely by decision, and probably I would guess that he pulls away in the championship rounds or like 10, 11, 12. That's where he makes it a clear separation, so it's kind of like a 9-3, 8-4 type of fight, where perhaps there's some argument, that Shawn Porter definitely gave him some trouble, but that Terence Crawford definitely won and should move forward and face whomever. But it should be a fun fight. I like the fight. Unfortunately, I wish it were supported by a slightly better undercard, but that's just kind of like the story. I hope that it winds up being competitive because that's the best
sure.
case scenario here in my
Um,
opinion. So doing just kind of a quick
I
rundown on.
was gonna say,
Go ahead. Yeah, please do.
um, I was gonna think like this. So I was thinking earlier, and maybe I'm off on this, but like I was thinking this fight, I'm almost comparing it kind of to like Mike McCallum, Donald Curry in a way. So the way I'm going with this is that like Terence Crawford is in the McCallum spot at this moment, right? Like McCallum back in the 80s, he was craving for a fight with, Leonard, Duran, more realistically, Duran or Hearns, as opposed to Leonard or Hagler, as people have gone on back and, throughout history. But like he was an undefeated champion, recognized as one of the better champions in the world, but a guy that was craving attention is still kind of flying under the radar, even though he had quality wins over an undefeated Julian Jackson, Milton McCrory, so on and so forth. But he still didn't have like a big signature win, and he wasn't going to get that big fight yet. Wasn't going to get that big fight with Duran or Hearns or whoever it was that he was craving to really put himself in the spotlight. Enter Donald Curry. Donald Curry was coming, even though he was recognized as one possibly the best pound for pound fighter at the world at one point. He was upset by Lloyd Hunnigan when he moves up in weight now, and his reputation's been slightly tainted since then. He's not quite recognized now as the best, but he's moved up. And even though I'm not going to consider him like Porter, like they're in different roles at that point. Curry, I think, was more regarded as like a top guy than Porter was, but you see where I'm going with this, right? So like this was like McCallum's night to shine, maybe not against the guy that he's looking for, like the biggest name out there, but he's still like a big recognizable name
Yeah,
that he really
right.
needs this win for, because otherwise he loses this, he plummets. And instead he scored that spectacular knockout. So
Well, and and I think that is in that regard a pretty good comparison where it's like an opportunity for Terence
yeah,
Crawford to really seize momentum or whatever you want to call it, an opportunity for him to show that there has to be a demand for him to fight whoever it is, or at welterweight, that's calling themselves the man, or that he is going to be it. And so there is an opportunity for him to do that. Is it possible for him to do that? I mean, yes, I think that it is possible for him to do that. I think that Shawn Porter is there to be hit enough. He's not going to be difficult to find. And that if Terence Crawford can figure out the right kind of counters as Shawn Porter moves in, or something like that, or if he keeps leaning in, he figures out how to step back and uppercut or something like that, that there is the opportunity, because Terence Crawford is a good puncher at both 140 and 147, for him to potentially stop Shawn Porter, hurt him, whatever. But it's the kind of thing where he's going to have to take a risk. He's going to have to step outside of what he usually does. Like you brought up earlier, he usually kind of like feels his way around, and he's not going to strike unless he knows for sure it's safe. And the only times that's happened where he's not done that is when he's been threatened, where a fighter has gone in and hurt him or tried to hurt him, tried to follow up, but he's like, wham, bam, that shit ain't happening. And that's just the kind of fighter he is. But there is an opportunity for him to do something spectacular.
absolutely, man. It's going to be a good fight. And it's one of those fights too, like you were just alluding to. It's not supported by a great undercard because hey, what pay-per-view show is nowadays, right?
That's
It's not
just
the 90s
crazy,
no more, my friend.
man. And even in the 90s, a lot of those shows were sometimes few and far between, but they were more often than now.
I mean,
That's for
no,
sure.
you know what? I get really nostalgic all the time and start weaving all that poetic about the 90s and all this bullshit, but not. For every like Revenge of the rematches, there was one of those bum ass cards that Bob Arum would put on with Butter being Mia St. John and like Vasily Girov knocking over a can. Okay.
No, and I mean it's true. Like there were really good cards, but there were shitty cards too. But I would say that the filled pay-per-views, there aren't too many of those these days. The last really good pay-per-view that I can remember, and I was kind of skeptical as to whether or not it would be even good. Like, and everybody kept saying that it was going to be good, and I was like, I don't know. It was that Twin Charlo pay-per-view that wound up being really, really good. But regardless,
That was a night. Long night.
yeah, dude, there have been a few that have been like I didn't expect much out of them, and they wound up being really good. But yeah, regardless, this is not, in my opinion, either on paper or likely to turn out to be a particularly good undercard. We have Esquiva Falcao, the Brazilian. I believe he was a silver medalist, Olympic medalist, against Patrice Volny, who is a dude from Montreal. I watched a little bit of video of him and some IBF middleweight eliminator. And I think I told you earlier, Patrice Volny reminded me a little bit of like a Lamont Peterson in a different class, like not quite on the level of a Lamont Peterson, in my opinion, from what I saw. And so I would kind of imagine Falcao will likely take that. And then it looks like the Ghost, formerly known as Hassan and Dom. No, I'm just kidding. Hassan and Dom.
I can't believe he's still active, bro.
Yeah, a name from a handful of years ago. I mean, not that long ago, but long enough
ago.
It's
been a long time. It's been a decade since Peter Quillen was bouncing him off the canvas on.
Yeah, so
he was on the first bar. He was in the first fight on Barclays. He was in the part of that first card.
And it's kind of like you kind of have to at some point just step up and admit that even though the guy has name recognition, the name recognition is because he got his ass kicked by somebody better.
Yeah, I mean last time I saw him in a fight, the last high profile fight I think he was in was on a DAZN show I worked against, what was it, the Smith, Callum Smith. I think it was Callum Smith.
Yeah, he does
and
not.
Callum Smith, like I'm not even sure if Ndam landed more than a handful of punches, but Smith bounced him in like 2 or 3 rounds. It was bad. Like he had no balance. He had no business being in there. So the fact that he's being used again is just kind of like,
Yeah, he's taking on a dude named Janibek Alim Gnuli. I'm not super familiar with him, but he's unbeaten, and I would imagine that Ndam's being brought in to lose, quite frankly. And then a couple of fighters that I'm pretty unfamiliar with, and Raymond Muratalia and Steven Ortiz are fighting. And like I told you, the most interesting fight to me on the undercard is probably the one that's on the ESPN Plus portion, the very opening portion of the show, which is Isaac Dogboy and Christopher Pitufo Diaz, which is a very clear crossroads type of fight where Isaac Dogboy is like kind of a, you need to do something in this fight or you're going to really seriously think about getting out of here, buddy. And Pitufo Diaz is obviously hot at the moment, and a lot of people are touting him as the future or whatnot. So it's a clear crossroads fight that I like a lot. But beyond that, it's not a particularly strong card.
Both guys have like fun styles that'll mesh well as well. Dogbo is always in good fights, and he's an entertaining guy. So he's totally coming off of a solid win too against Hector Lopez's kid. What was it, Adam Lopez?
Yeah. So I mean, it makes sense. It's a pretty good fight, but something that I actually a slightly more worth mentioning, or considerably more worth mentioning, is the fight card the night before. So on Friday, yep. This guy. Oh man, poor Boo Boo. No,
me again.
Just me again. So Boo Boo Andrade, Demetrius Andrade is headlining a DAZN card the night before, so Friday, November 19th, and he is fighting Jason Quigley. Not, the highest level of fight in my opinion, but he's, I think, headlining, but far more interesting on that card in my opinion, Julio Cesar Martinez versus McWilliams Arroyo for the WBC flyweight title. Should be a very good fight. McWilliams Arroyo brings it. Julio Cesar Martinez, very good fighter. And then also very important, Kali Reis taking on Jessica Camara, also on that card. So, I mean, 140-pound, for the 140-pound title, man, that's actually a good card. I wish that would have been the undercard. Pretty much all of that would have been the undercard for Crawford-Porter, but you can't get it all,
I mean, you got to admit Eddie Hearn usually stacks his cards pretty well. He doesn't just overcharge $80 and just kind of throws you whatever while making sure that you're just going to pay for the main event. So there's always usually a couple of quality like title fights under there. Whether they make sense in that location or not is up to you, I guess. But hey, I'm always up for a solid card regardless.
Well, the fact that it's in New Hampshire too, I mean, it's at the very least, it's interesting that it's in New Hampshire because that's a state that doesn't see a ton of boxing,
like
at least not on that level.
No, definitely not. I think, well, they're trying to play it off, and I guess we all discovered this today that they were saying that this was the first title fight ever in New Hampshire, and that just wasn't the case. I think we found our buddy Gray told us earlier that it was actually Sam Langford against Barbados Joe Walcott for the welterweight title back in early 1900.
Yeah, in September of 1904.
Yeah.
And I mean, not trying to rain on DAZN's parade or anything like that, but I guess there is some.
I'm just showing you how often, like, we're just giving you an idea of how when's the last time big time boxing has really been around New Hampshire. Like, it's not a state that gets anything like that.
Right. I mean, if you got to go back to 1904,
even Maine was getting more action with boxing with like Joey Gamache and stuff. So
it's like falling out of copyright at this point. So yeah, you're good to say that it's the first New Hampshire. No, I mean, it was even tenuous, I guess, between Sam Langford and Joe Walcott because it wasn't clear from what I could see what exactly Sam Langford weighed in at, because I kept seeing fight reports where they called him light heavyweight. But whatever. I mean, either way, it is pretty cool to have a venue or a locale
card there.
Yeah,
I mean, there's gonna be a good crowd there. Absolutely. Like, people are gonna travel from New England for Providence and everything to go see Boo Boo because that's not far at all. And then his opponent Quigley also with a contingent from Boston, I'm sure he's gonna bring in because that's really a hop and a skip away from New Hampshire. So yeah, that's gonna be a raucous crowd. And like you mentioned, considering that they never get big time boxing like that, and things will be priced relatively well, I'm sure, for tickets. Yeah, man, it's gonna be a cool atmosphere. I kind of wish I was there.
Yeah, I don't really know what kind of crowd they can expect. I mean, I'm just being honest. I have absolutely no idea whether or not they're going to be able to attract much, but I do know that Kali Reis in particular has been gaining in popularity in the last few years. She's on a really good run. We were talking earlier about her fight with Cecilia Brækhus, and I said I thought she probably should have or could have won that fight. A lot of people said that at the time, back in 2018 when that happened. I think Cecilia Brækhus has clearly been, I don't want to say exposed, but just I think that it's become clear that she was kind of toward the end of her career for whatever that's worth. But regardless, if you give Kali Reis that win, she should be undefeated since mid 2017, and she would be on a pretty good run. Even if you don't spot her that win, though, she's on a pretty good run and has been doing really well. And like I said, gaining in popularity. And one of the things that I just had to look up because I wasn't going to mention it and remembered, she actually is starring in a movie coming up that's going to be released in February 2022, but it's already been produced and is it's already wrapped and all that type of stuff, called Catch the Fair One, that is, I guess, kind of a mystery type of movie, and she's the lead star in it. And apparently, from what I was reading, it's actually been screened at some, I don't know what festivals, and I couldn't tell you whether or not they're important in the film industry. I'm just being honest, but it did sound like they'd been screened at some festivals and had been very well received. So in any case, yeah, I mean, it's always good to see, number one, representation of boxing, you know, anywhere in media and stuff like that, in a positive way, but also representation of indigenous people, which
Absolutely.
Kali Reis is. You know, and she's also extremely vocal about that issue. So it's really cool to see that she's being you know, being the one of the focal points
Yeah, gonna
of
be in a
that
feature
boxing
for it.
card.
It's awesome to see the women's renaissance in boxing. It really is, man.
The last year, couple years have been
Huge.
uh yeah, I think really eye-opening for a lot of fans. I hope.
Big strides. And it was cool to hear, the news recently with Clarissa Shields as well, that she just broke that 7-figure deal it was, right?
It looks like she's going to be fighting for, I think it's a Sky Sports supported company called Boxer with a few X's in it. But it's you know, it's it, almost kind of like a showbox type of thing, but not prospect level, it seems. Like not like an ongoing series, but in any case, it's going to be more British or UK based, it sounds like, but they're going to be branching out. And it's, hey, man, anything that's providing more opportunities, especially for women's boxing, I consider that good. Clarissa Shields, whether or not you like her style, whether or not you like her personality, has clearly paid some dues in boxing and deserves some respect and some fucking pay. So I'm happy to see her get that. And hopefully those kinds of things also lead to somebody like Kali Reis getting better paydays and getting more exposure. So, I mean, the card this weekend is definitely a step toward that, but she is also in a pretty competitive fight.
That's what the best thing is about usually, when you can find a women's fight that can be actually really competitive at that top level, because it's tough. Shields is recognized and calls herself the greatest woman of all time, but at the same time, look at the competition that she has out there. I mean, it's easy to be the top one. There's only just a handful of fighters even as active as pros, let alone top ones. But as the lower weights go down, the competition does get stiffer, and that division around welterweight, junior welterweight, over in women's boxing is very deep. And now that Cecilia Brækhus, who was consensus pound for pound the best women's fighter in the world at one time, has been knocked off her mantle by Jessica McCaskill, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's created almost like an open door for this division. I mean, she's up atop as the champ, but I mean, like, I don't know. There just seems like there's a lot of movement going on, and this is big now for Kali Reis, like you said, who's making a lot of momentum. This is a big showcase for her. And considering too that it's in New England and New Hampshire, where a lot of her fans can easily travel over to that, she's gonna have a good following.
Yeah, I hope so, and I hope that there's a pretty good showing and a pretty good turnout for the card. But man,
I don't know, man. I mean, it's I'd rather talk to somebody who is more familiar with the New Hampshire shows than I would be, I guess, in terms of the boxing scene. But the one time I went out there for a fight a long time ago, to work a Cedric show with my old boss, late great Cedric Kushner, people were out there and they were pretty packed up. Live boxing doesn't come out there often. It was featuring a washed Omar Shika against some Midwestern guy, which ended up being a hell of a fight, but they were there. People showed up. So who knows? I think for a world title fight that they know is going to be on televised and stuff like that, this isn't an event that happens often in New Hampshire. Like, most people that live in New Hampshire, if they want for like a live sporting event like that big, they got to go to Boston, no, to like see the Red Sox, Celtics, or whatever it may be. So the fact that they can actually just travel to it, and it's a close enough, like a hop and a skip away from them, it's probably even more enticing.
Yeah, I would imagine, dude. I mean, it's pretty close to some. It's close to a cluster of big cities, and I
New
mean,
Hampshire is really close to Massachusetts, like Boston. It's really, really close.
when it comes to Demetrius Andrade, I mean, just to briefly talk about him and his situation at middleweight. I mean, dude, the fact of the matter is there aren't really very many people who are all that interested in, like, I'll watch him fight. I don't have any particular issue with him. I'm just not going to like go out of my way. And I think that that's how most people feel. They'll watch him fight. They don't
Hmm.
have a problem with them. They're just not going to go out of their way. And then he's like so goofy, but not in a way that's like endearing. He's goofy in a way that's like annoying. And
Even
so
in his fights, like his fights, he's regressed in a way because he goes out there demanding no one wants to fight on the boogeyman of the division. I'm this, I'm that. Why fight him when like? And every time he goes in there against a guy who's clearly overmatched, he doesn't put an exclamation on his point where people are going to be, well, like, I want him to fight Canelo. I need him to fight one of the Charlos. Well, I mean, he gets more attention to fight the Charlos than Canelo, but like, there's no, for him begging to fight Canelo for so long and to fight any of these other top guys and saying everyone's ducking him. And then he goes out there and fights a guy like Luke Keeler and goes the distance with someone that, like of that without even trying. Like you can tell it's just a sparring session for him, or so the guy before that was a, I can't pronounce his name. Saluki, the
yeah.
yeah. But like these guys have been completely overmatched. Couldn't even land a glove on him. And instead of him going out there and putting the gas on it and really trying to make a statement and taking someone out like he should to get the wheels rolling, instead he just kind of coasts and goofs around at the end and makes exaggerated things where he becomes a goofy meme from it. And he expects people to go there and demand that they want him fight. Like, no, that's his problem. He's been kind of like stuck between a rock and a hard place ever since the beginning of his career, like you were saying, because of bad business decisions that he made early on, who he hooked up with early on as for promoters and stuff like that. Like when he gets out of the Olympics, it was a little bit of a disappointment that he didn't medal like people were expecting, but he was still had a name coming out of there. And instead of signing with somebody big, he ended up going with Joe Dugardi or Artie Palullo and like a co-promotional deal with them. And you know, it took for a while for him to really get momentum going, and he wasn't really featuring much on a lot of things until finally he got that fight with Vanis on HBO, and he didn't look impressive in that one. He got dropped in it, and then like kind of struggled to a decision win, but he got a title. HBO was still going to be invested in him and still working, and was going to give him fights. He had a couple of his fights televised. It looked like he was gaining momentum because he was actually knocking these guys out. And then when that fight with Charlo was supposed to happen on Showtime, everything kind of fell apart in his career, it seems, since then. Because I don't remember what the whole backstory on it, but for whatever it was, that fight, which a lot of people were anticipating, fell apart. And at that point, that probably was going to be a winnable fight for Andrade because he was still more disciplined than what he is now with his technique and everything. So once that happened, man, he's been like, it's just been like a lot of starting and stopping. Even though he's been champion consistently and still undefeated, he's never really been able to gain momentum ever since that fight fell through. I mean, dude, he's been pro since 2008. He's only had 30 pro fights.
Well, and it seems like they've tried just about everything, dude. Like they've tried gimmicks. He's like, excuse me, they have him on at other fight cards. They interview him. He's fairly dull, fairly bland. He doesn't really have a very engaging personality. He kind of tries to shout some catchphrases out there that are strange. I mean, no, I don't know. Like I said, he's a goofball, dude. I don't think really many people clamor to see him, really relate to him, etc. So it's difficult, dude. And it's not that I don't feel his pain. Uh, he does probably deserve a bigger fight with one of, I don't know, Golovkin or so. I mean, and that's the really shitty
That'd be a
thing.
really interesting fight, actually, considering
I
how past it Golovkin is now. Absolutely.
and that's kind of like the extra shitty thing here, in my opinion, at least from my standpoint, is that DAZN seemed to nab up Golovkin so that he could fight Canelo, and it happened once. And then Golovkin's otherwise kind of been just, shelved for the most part. and then they nabbed up Demetrius Andrade, presumably so that they
The
can
same
have this
reason.
little middleweight, whatever.
Yeah.
And that didn't happen either. And it's like,
It's
so
been a
then
complete disaster. Everything fell
what
apart.
did you do this for? Like, what do
You
you
wasted
guys, and
all
then,
that money for nothing. Yeah.
and they lost Canelo. So it's like,
Yeah, I think
what
Triple
are
G. I don't know. Is this
you?
fight on DAZN coming up, or isn't that on Amazon Prime or some shit?
I mean, dude, it's bad. It's real bad. So anyway, yeah, I do feel bad for Demetrius Andrade. It's just that I don't know what I'm
He's
supposed to
just
do
doing
for him.
himself no favors, man.
Yeah,
And
I don't know what I'm supposed to do for the guy.
Quigley's another guy too. It's like it's another fight that he's not going to get anything out of these fights, and eventually he's going to get upset in one of them. Like it's going to get to the point of that. Like even in his last fight against Liam Williams, he
Yeah,
was hurt a
the
couple of
running
times.
around and the
Yeah,
ducking and what the
and
hell
he
are
was
you doing,
legitimately
bro?
hurt a few times in that fight. Like, and a guy like Williams shouldn't have been able. No offense to Williams, he's a good fighter, but he shouldn't have laid a glove on him. He really shouldn't have. And when Andre dropped him around 2, and this is like how it always is in his fights, bro. He drops a guy early, looks like he's gonna blow him out. Looks really good the first few rounds because he's actually like comes out there, throwing and being fast and explosive, and then he just stops and he gets into this thing and just starts coasting because he realizes the guy can't hurt him, and then he doesn't want to step on the gas, and I don't know what he decides to do, but it doesn't do anybody favors. And
does he realize? Does he even realize that the great Howard Eastman, the Howard Eastman held the WBO middleweight? Does he even understand that he's disgracing Howard Eastman?
Probably not. Absolutely not. Howard Eastman's the dude that used to have the blonde beard, right?
Yeah. He had the like monk haircut because he was going bald. Yeah,
he was an interesting dude.
Yeah, I saw Bernard Hopkins versus Howard Eastman at Staples Center.
Nice.
Yeah. I think I might have the t-shirt somewhere, but I don't even know.
But yeah, man, he needs to. I mean, Quigley's not a bad fighter, but Quigley's not a world beater either. He's like a guy who lost to Toriano Johnson. Johnson's a good fighter himself, but he's not an elite fighter. So that kind of gives you the level of where Quigley is at, right? So Andrade obviously should be able to beat this guy relatively easy around him, but where does he go from here? What is there to do? Canelo clearly has no interest in ever wanting to fight him, and that fight's never going to happen. There's still the Charlo brothers, and Chris Mannix and others have been demanding that fight left and right, and that's a fight that probably should happen. It should have happened years ago, but for whatever, like we mentioned, once it fell apart, it's never really been brought up again. And with that being said, that's the fight that should be made. That's the one they should be trying to go after because the Canelo one's never going to happen. Whether or not it can happen is another whole other story, but that's the one that needs to be done. You know what I mean? If that's like his big one, I think that's a winnable fight for him too. Like Andrade, for all of his goofiness and everything like that, if he actually stayed disciplined and really stuck to his game plan, I think he can outbox Charlo relatively, comprehensively. If he doesn't get caught, that is. But I don't know if that fight will ever get made either,
Well, and I think you pretty much nailed it when you said that he's not doing anything in the ring to make those fights a demand. He's not doing anything to make it so that, people are demanding that people want to see it. And I think like me generally recognize that he deserves them, but there's no demand. And without any demand, nobody cares.
No. Like if a fight with Charlo was made, people would have interest in it and be like, all right, cool, it's gonna be a good fight. It'll be an interesting fight to watch. But no one's out there saying this needs to be done. If he has another whole hump fight this Friday where he goes the distance and wins 118, 110, 120, 108, whatever it is, but doesn't do anything out of the ordinary to push it, and people are falling asleep and saying, what the hell is this? Runs around like he's done in other fights and just does stupid antics, then he has all of himself to blame at that point, because what else is there to be done? There's literally nothing else you can do.
Yep.
It's like, this is who he is. You can't go out demanding fights and doing that when you start putting in performances like that, because no one's going to want to see you.
Well, just like Canelo said, get the fuck out of here.
Yeah,
get the fuck out of here. That would be an
interesting fight. I think Canelo obviously would be the major favorite in it, but I think Andrade has a style even more so than Plant that can give Canelo fits for a little bit.
it's one of those styles where if he puts it together, it's a pain in the ass style for sure. But there is that possibility too that Canelo just beats the ever loving dog shit out of him, and then that's it. But that, and for a lot of people, would be, you know, getting rid of Boo Boo, and that would be, we wouldn't have to worry about that shit. But dude, I actually forgot the other day when we did the Hall of Fame episode, but before we get out of here today, I did want to answer. So on Instagram, I asked, you know, if there was any questions anybody had or anything like that, and I forgot to ask them the other day. So Rocket Rod from I would imagine Queensland. I know he's from Australia, but he has QLD at the end of his name, so I think he's from Queensland. In any case, he said, he asked what our favorite random movie or like TV boxer cameo came, like not so much a boxing role like Antonio Tarver in Rocky 6, more like Tex Cobb in X-Files, or Jake LaMotta in The Hustler. And then his second question was thoughts on a fantasy matchup between 1973 George Foreman against 1994 George Foreman. So those are a couple of pretty good questions, in my opinion.
Yeah. The first one, it was kind of boxing related when he made the cameo, but it doesn't get talked about enough because it was absolutely hilarious. It was when Hector Camacho one time played on an episode of the Wayans Brothers a long time ago. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was on the episode of the Wayans Brothers one time, and he was in the gym. His name was Hot Pepper Lopez, and he was in the gym, I guess, visiting his old gym, and Marlon was training or something like that. I don't know what he was doing. He was being goofy, but Camacho decided while the cameras were rolling, because he was doing a documentary, Hot Pepper Lopez, Camacho holds the bag for Marlon, and Marlon's hitting it, and then when he wasn't looking, he hit Camacho by accident and knocked him out. And so Camacho got pissed off about it, challenged him to a fight, and then they, that's the end of the episode. Is they have a big match against each other, which ends up being hilarious. Because like,
so in the vein of like Tommy Hearns Martin.
Yeah, something similar to that, but it's like it's even more goofier. Like at one point, they because Marlon's nickname becomes Sucker Punch, so he Marlon Sucker Punch Williams. Yeah, so at one point during the boxing match, like the bell rings for the round to end, and Marlon ran up and slapped Camacho in the head, and the crowd started chanting Sucker Punch, and he started dancing around cheering about it. And the other part that was really funny was the guy, I think Shawn or someone, took like all the Vaseline you can imagine and globbed it on his forehead and the face mask. And so when Camacho tried punching it, his hands kept on slipping off, and he was looking at the referee saying, "What the hell?" Because Marlon just put his head down like this, where everything was going. That was just one of them. I mean, there's so many to think of off the top of my head, but like that, when I was a little kid, then when Marvin Hagler showed up on Punky Brewster, I thought that was cool. I had no idea who Hagler was when I was a little kid and saw that episode. I'm not going to pretend that I did, but as an adult and, growing up and learning about it and stuff like that.
I think one of the ones that, I mean, I didn't know this at the time, or I wouldn't have recognized it at the time, but knowing about it now, actually two fighters were on this show. Alexis Arroyo was on Miami Vice, and then Roberto Duran was also on Miami Vice. And I'm pretty sure they both played like drug dealers or something similar.
Always a lot of people on Miami Vice. Miles Davis played a drug dealer on Miami Vice.
Yeah, they were all, I mean, dude, coke, I guess, was the shit in Miami in the 1980s. So yeah, there was always they needed somebody to be dealing some coke on Miami Vice, I guess.
Remember Duran on in Harlem Nights?
Yep, Duran was in Harlem Nights too. Yeah. Trying to think what else. Carlos Palomino. He was in a bunch of shit, actually.
He was in Taxi, I think, right? A couple of times.
He was in Taxi, and he's been in like a handful of movies too, like notable movies.
Ray Mancini was in movies and on TV shows all the time.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, Carlos Palomino was actually in a bunch of TV commercials too. Like he was actually, a lot of people don't realize he was actually pretty big in his day.
Huge. Absolutely. Those
Yeah,
Palomino Miller Lite commercials were always fun.
yeah, yeah. There's a string of them for sure. Yeah, I
And
mean, there are a bunch of like boxer cameos and stuff like that. I actually didn't even. I probably should have looked. I didn't Google that, but I bet you if you Googled boxer cameos on TV or movies or something like that, there have been so many boxing forums and stuff like that. There's probably a thread somewhere of them.
but
Um,
it wasn't a cameo that I watched the other day, but it was a name drop that had me absolutely dying on Martin. And so Martin, Martin always had a boxing background, like legitimately. So he always like incorporated a
yeah,
little bit into his shows. And so at one point, I don't know, I forgot what episode it was. I think it was they were trying to figure out if Gina was pregnant. So he was at the pharmacy. And the guy behind the counter was an elderly guy who's been in other episodes. But like he was really elderly and shuffling along and being really slow and stuff, right? So long story short, Martin starts antagonizing the guy because he's pissed off at him. And the old guy tells him, he was like, "You better show me my respect." And Martin goes, "What'd you say to me?" And the guy gets up and he goes, "You show me my respect, or I'll whip you like I whipped Jersey Joe Walcott in '37." And then he pushed the table away and Martin ran away. I thought
that's
that was
pretty
awesome.
fucking good.
Yeah, he said, "I'll whip you like I whipped Jersey
Shit.
Joe Walcott in 1937." And he pushed the table away and Martin ran out of the store freaked out.
Well, I mean, speaking of Tex Cobb, dude, he's been in a bunch. He's in Raising Arizona, great Coen Brothers movie. Is in Ace Ventura.
Well, yeah, he was great in Ace Ventura.
Yeah, dude,
Absolutely.
the bad guy in the beginning. He was actually in a bunch of movies too. He's been in a few football movies and shit. Like he seems like a dude that would be a hoot to have some drinks with, and
Even The
just chill with.
Simpsons had cartoon fighters in it. Like
Yep,
Joe Frazier was in it one time.
that's true.
He got into a fight with Barney. Oscar De La
They've had
Hoya
a
was on it
bunch.
one
Like Ray
time.
Leonard was on it. Oscar De La
Jerry
Hoya's
Cooney.
on it. Yeah, they've had a bunch for sure. And then of
And
course
man,
they had
poor Cooney
Redrick
got the
Tatum.
joke on him because he walked up and tried to play security and got knocked out immediately.
Oh, I totally forgot. I forgot about this one. Riddick Bowe in Fresh Prince.
Was he? I don't even remember
Yeah,
that.
there's an episode of Fresh Prince where they're on like a road trip or they're doing something. I don't remember. Like they're at some roadside diner or some shit, and I can't remember. I would bet that it's on YouTube, but they're at some roadside diner or some shit, and I think it's the episode where Carlton is like he's like playing a slot machine or some shit like that in the diner, and Riddick Bowe comes up and starts talking to him, and Carlton starts talking shit, and Will has to step in, and then he walks up and gets knocked out by Riddick Bowe.
Oh wow, nah.
Yeah,
Check that out.
it's probably on YouTube, but I almost forgot about that one. That was a pretty good one too.
Also, Frankie Lyles was with Tommy Hearns in that Martin episode randomly. Like
That's fucking
I
awesome.
just remember that because his only word was when they were introducing themselves. He said, "I'm Frankie Lyles," and they never said another word in the episode.
What was that Pointer Sisters shit you showed? Is that Mark Breland?
Oh, that was Mark Breland. Yes, he was in the Pointer System music video.
I mean,
because
not quite
they
the
were
same.
involved. You know what? They were such an integral part of the Pointer Sisters, who I love. And if you're 80s music, you should love them too. They were such an integral part of the Four Kings when you think about it, because they really did the national anthems for a lot of those major fights at that time period. If they weren't, they were ringside for the fights. Like they were big, they were huge in the 80s. So they were always at the fights doing national anthems. They played a big part, and they're featured prominently, talked about in the George Kimball Four Kings book. So yeah, Mark Breland, that was a cool video. Mark Breland was featuring that. It's in the boxing gym, all that.
Yeah, it's a trip.
Yeah. Tommy Morrison was on television, I think, besides Rocky V. So many, man.
Yeah, there's a lot. So I would recommend probably Googling, but I think that's a pretty good start. As far as the George Foreman question, I mean, I think that Foreman himself said that he felt like his older self would have beaten his younger self just because he was smarter, and he was better at like conserving his energy and wasn't just throwing haymakers like he was when he was younger. And I mean, I think I probably would agree with that. But there's, of course, when anybody's even in this mythical shit, I know, but anybody fighting young George, dude, it's like you can't get hit. Like you can't get hit like that. Even if it's old George might go to sleep if he got hit the wrong way. So I mean, I know it's kind of a weird paradoxical thing to say, but anyway, I'd probably go with old George.
It's tough to say, man. It's like in a 12-round fight, I could almost see young George outpointing old George, especially like
that's a good point too, though, because
especially
he did have some kind of lazy showings.
Yeah, especially like the post Ali fight where besides where he lost his energy completely against Jimmy Young, Foreman did try to show like some semblance of not just weighing again like a maniac. Like he was trying to, you know what I mean? Trying to be a little bit more patient to the point where I think if he had fought Ali in a rematch, he probably would have beat him. But I could see that. But at the same time, if it go like I could also see him if it's like young Foreman that's just completely reckless, pre-Ali, who just walked in like a brute with abandon, not really thinking about anything except taking your head off, I could see old Foreman taking him out. So
yeah,
it kind of goes both
that's
ways.
what he was saying was 73 Foreman. So it would have
okay,
been
so if you're
Ali.
going back that early one like that, then I think I'm gonna go with old George. He's gonna have to weather some shit though, like badly.
Yeah.
And
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Is that like I'd
really
probably pick him, but
it's really tough too because like a guy comparable, I guess, maybe to young George in terms of style and just obviously not durability and as brutish, but like someone like Alex Stewart, right? Look what Alex Stewart, his style with the moving, swarming, lots of punches, very heavy-handed, and the way he marked up Foreman's face. Like he put a whooping on Foreman at that point. Like, he turned him into hamburger meat. People were having outcries after that fight that he needs to retire for his safety and health and all that shit. Like he would have to go through some stuff to get through young George, man. Like young George isn't like Mike Tyson, who's short and would be able to be pushed around and all that. Like he's fighting just a younger, stronger version of himself who would try to be doing the same shit. So if he could outlast that, which is a big if, then I think he'd be able to take out Foreman late, the young one. Because like you said, he's smarter and everything like that, but he's gonna have to go through some hellacious stuff, and his face is gonna have to hold up from it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's a pretty intriguing matchup, though. You know what I mean? Like
I can't even like think to predict winner, man, because I can see both scenarios playing out as wins right there, man. It's like, Ring Magazine one time, I think they mentioned that in the old one from years back, obviously in the 90s, they did like a computerized thing putting young George against old George. And I think young George came out on top more so than old George in like the scenarios that they put together, more so by knockout than anything, but who knows,
Yeah, well, you deal with that kind of power, period. It's tough to argue against it.
Dude, he was the most.
I'll pick George
Foreman. He might have been the strongest heavyweight ever. Maybe not in terms of one punch knockout power, but like just in terms of just brute strength. Can you really think of anyone else that might have been as strong as Foreman? Not even Liston.
Well, and I was gonna say it would probably be Foreman and Liston, and they were both like pointing at each other, like him.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, take your pick. But it's
strong. Oh my god, and like he just so tough, dude. It would have been a fascinating fight during that time period had Foreman beaten Jimmy Young, and then his career probably would have went on from there. But him and Larry Holmes, think of that around like 1979 or so, fuck.
Yeah, well, and I mean, if Ken Norton, who granted was a different style, was able to push Larry Holmes, to the limit, and a young Holmes, but even so, able to push Larry Holmes to the limit, dude. If Foreman hadn't lost his mojo and we're going forward with his career, that could have been a scary fight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, dude, I hope the fights this weekend, both Friday and Saturday, wind up being a lot of fun, for both us and for anybody watching and for people tuning in to this show. I very much appreciate it. And of course, Aris, I appreciate you, dude. It's always a good time talking boxing with you, man.
Yeah, man, it's gonna be a blast. Enjoy the fights, everybody, this weekend.
For sure. And before you enjoy the fights, in the meanwhile, if you are on, for instance, social media like Twitter, follow my boy Aris Pina, Punch Zone Aris. Follow me, Patrick Connor at Patrick M. Connor. If you are on Facebook, the Knuckles and Gloves podcast is on Facebook and it's also on Instagram. But also, if you are watching, very helpful if you subscribe on YouTube and share it with your friends, cousins, grandma, whomever it might be, grandpa too. Should be a lot of fun, man. But also, look, I know I plugged it last week, but I'll just go ahead and do it again because why not? If you wouldn't mind, look, the holidays are coming up, dude. Might need a book. You might need a book as a present. And if you do, check out my book right above the microphone here. That's the cover. It's a shot at a brothel, the spectacular demise of Oscar Ringo Bonavanish. Pretty fun, true crime, boxing history book.
Pretty fascinating read, people. I'm not even gonna front. It's awesome.
Appreciate it. Yeah, it's a lot of fun and it's a pretty quick read, but you could also pick it up for cheap. Stick it in the stock. Stick it in the stocking. That was a difficult phrase for me to say, but
Say that 3 times fast.
I know it's going to be. I'll try it. I really will next time. But anyway, also, I guess the very last thing is the podcast apps. Subscribe on the apps and give us a rating. That's it. I swear. Aris, bro, we will talk soon.
Have a good one, everyone.
Later, everybody.